Well, friends, thank you again for joining us for our Clerk of Session training in January 2026. Whether you're watching tonight or otherwise, we're glad that you're with us. I'm going to mute everybody who's not speaking right now just so we don't end up with echo unintentionally along the way. So give me just a moment. So I have a PowerPoint presentation. We'll try to get through as much of it as we can. I also will make sure you get a copy of this when we're done. I have a folder of resources that I've built up over the years that hopefully will be useful for you. Please don't hesitate to stop me, ask questions along the way if you have them. I'd be glad to try my best to answer whatever I can and help you get a better sense of the work of clerks and how we can do it together. So, um, at its core, being a clerk, whether of session or a presbytery, is is built on keeping the story. And I'm deeply indebted to a colleague and friend who was working alongside and working and serving alongside me a decade or so ago back in New York when I was clerk. I think he was the moderator at the time. And we were talking about our different roles. And he said, Andy, you're the griot. And I don't know, some of you might be familiar with this word and term and role. This is a griot is a traditional West African storyteller, historian, poet, musician, and diplomat. The griot is highly regarded within their communities for their role in preserving and sharing the oral history and culture of their people. And so I've thought a lot about this over the years, and I think the clerk is, at its core, the one who helps the church keep the story. Because we keep the stories of Presbyterian governance. We help people remember why we are Presbyterian and what that means. We keep the stories of our local church as we take minutes, keep records, keep the membership register in order, all of those things. And we keep the stories of the broader church. We make sure that others around us know and understand what is happening in our midst so that we can all come together and have a better sense of what God is doing within and beyond our life together. So tonight we'll look at these three areas of how we keep these stories. The first thing is we'll be looking at how do we keep the story of Presbyterian governance? What does that mean? It doesn't mean you're in charge of making sure the meetings run perfectly. It doesn't mean that you have to be the perfect parliamentarian, but I hope that it means that you won't forget why we do what we do and how we do what we do, because those two things are deeply intertwined with each other and with doing our work at its best. So I always turn to the principles of Presbyterian governance found at F-3.02 in the Book of Order. These date back to 1797, and they have been adapted and revised into the form that we see now in the Book of Order. You'll, some of these will be somewhat familiar to you, I think. So, first of all the congregations of the Presbyterian Church USA are one church. We are one church together. We have different expressions in our different congregations and presbyteries and synods. In our one church, we are governed by presbyters. We are governed, that is, ruling elders and teaching elders, ministers. Presbyters being the Greek word for elders. Presbyters come together in councils to make decisions for the church. With the councils of the church being sessions, presbyteries, synods, and general assembly. All of this is probably very, very familiar to you. You've gotten trained on it repeatedly when you've gone on session. You deal with us every day. But it's important to remember that because we are connected to each other and yet we're distinct. So all the councils of the church, the sessions, the presbyteries, the synods, and the General Assembly are unique and distinct, separate from each other, but they are connected. Back to that first statement that we're one church. So the act of one of our councils is the act of the whole church. When we make our decisions, we discern together. We are not elected by the people to represent them, but to seek together to find and represent the will of Christ. When we make decisions, we do that by majority vote after opportunity for discussion and discernment. That opportunity for discussion and discernment is where we can sometimes do things a little bit differently, maybe in ways we didn't expect. Once we make a decision, our structure requires that councils have the right to review and control those that are below them. So the presbytery can review and control sessions. Synods can review and control presbyteries. General Assembly can review and control synods. So, and that's an important part of the work you do as clerks. All of us share ordination as the way we are set apart for leadership in the church. Ordination is by councils after being elected by the people. I think most importantly, in all of these slides, it's always important to remember that everything we do as we keep the story of the church is helping us all to remember that the power we have is not in any one of us, but it comes when we come together in councils. So the clerk of session has a lot of responsibility, but very limited power. All of the responsibility is there for serving the broader church and helping us seek and discern the will of Christ together in new ways. So if we're about keeping the story of the church, how do we do that at the local level? That is the core responsibility of the clerk of session. When you go to the Book of Order at G30104, there are 5 responsibilities of every clerk of every council. Sessions, presbytery. I have these same responsibilities as stated clerk of the presbytery, for the presbytery. To record the transactions of the council, keep rolls of membership and attendance, maintain any required registers, preserve its records, and furnish extracts from all of these things when required and requested by another council of the church. So those are the 5 core responsibilities. Other things pop up from time to time, but all of those are really about they kind of dig into these particular responsibilities or something that your local session asks you to do. This is probably something that's more useful when you see it in the slide presentation that I'll share with you afterward, which are the key Book of Order references for clerks. Things to pay attention to, um, where the clerk is responsible for being the secretary and taking minutes for congregational meetings. The clerk has some responsibilities if a ruling elder, deacon renounces the jurisdiction of the church. Those responsibilities I've just mentioned as an officer of this session, talking about the process for election on there. There are some formal responsibilities in a meeting if there is a dissent or protest filed. I sure hope you don't have any of that, but every now and then you do. Um, and when that happens, that's when you call me. That's probably the best thing to do. And the last thing is about maintaining records, and we'll talk briefly about all of these things this evening. So the first thing we'll talk about, as the clerk keeps the congregation's story, how do you get to be a clerk? You'd be surprised how many people come to me and ask this question even after they've been elected a clerk. Um, there are three core statements that it must be a ruling elder elected by the session for such term as it may determine. Now, the caveats, the additional pieces there are that remember it's a ruling elder. You have to have been ordained at some point. You not necessarily are currently active as an installed elder on session. Several of you have mentioned how you serve for an extended period of time. And that's a wonderful and good thing because of the experience you bring to this work. But you remember you have a 6-year term limit for session members. So you might step back from active service on session and continue as clerk. I served as a small church pastor for 11 years, and we had the same clerk throughout that entire time. She was first elected clerk about 15 years before I got there in 2005, and she is still the clerk of session in that church. So, yeah, the I'm going to make sure I did see a note. Is everybody still able to see the PowerPoint? Um, If you can't see the PowerPoint, make sure you select, there may be options at the top to select meeting or shared screen. And just look and see if you might have clicked the wrong thing up there. And if you didn't get the slides, we'll get them to you later. So the other things to remember about electing the clerk, you have to be elected by the session. The pastor doesn't appoint you. Um, the outgoing clerk doesn't appoint you. It has to be elected by the session. And then that term, it can't be forever. It is not an indefinite term. For such term as it may determine. That means it's got to be definite. It could be, generally, clerks are elected on an annual basis. There is no restriction on the renewal of terms for clerks. But those folks are, but some churches might make that distinction. Let me pause at this point and say, does anybody have any questions about electing clerks? All right. So we'll talk a little bit more about keeping the records. So what are the records that might be involved? The the clerk prepare generally pre, whoops clerk generally prepares the minutes and of session meetings and congregational meetings. The clerk maintains the rolls and registers of the church. Those are outlined in the Book of Order. Those are things like the membership roll and the register of people who have been ordained as ruling elders and deacons. If you don't, to be clear, you don't have to keep that in the old-fashioned big giant church register book. Uh, but we do encourage you to keep it. If you keep it electronically, make sure you keep a paper copy as well, in case something weird happens. Select all and delete has happened more than once unintentionally. Um, the clerk is responsible for preserving the records. We'll talk a little bit about there are record retention schedules that are available to guide you on this. But the most important thing to remember is that session minutes are kept in perpetuity. So if your even if your church is dissolved, completes its ministry and goes in a new direction, your church records will need to be kept for in perpetuity. Then they come to the presbytery. So um, sometimes as clerk, you'll be asked to provide a verification of a certain action. So that might be something like um, this could be sending me a letter saying that you did something. You may also be asked to provide a letter to a civil source, or a letter to the bank saying that these people are authorized to be signers. That is very much within the purview of the clerk of session. And in that same way, the clerk is responsible for receiving and sending formal communications. So when the session says we are taking this action and we need it communicated, it generally comes out under the clerk's signature. So, it sometimes the pastor signs off on it, but the best practice is always for it to come from the clerk, because in the church, the clerk is our primary verification point. Any questions on general questions about keeping records? I've got some more to say about several of these things, but all right, so let's talk a little bit about minutes. What do you put in minutes? Let me first say that minutes are the most important part of that griot work because that's where you make sure that the story gets carried on to the next generation. So as you do minutes, you want to make sure that the story of the congregation is happening. So when something happens in the life of the church that seems to be important enough that it's going to need to be noted in 50 years, it should be in the minutes somewhere, somehow, some way. Ideally, it's in the minutes because somebody took an action related to it. Because at their core, minutes are a record of the actions taken by the session and congregation in, in formal meetings. So at their core, minutes have to include that record of actions taken. It's also helpful at times to include a brief summary of the context or the rationale that might be included, especially when those are included in a written report. And as I said, it's helpful to include those other details that tell the story of the congregation. And most of those are attached to actions. For example, you might, when someone gets married, the session is going to approve the building use, and that should be recorded in the minutes. Now, what doesn't go in the minutes? The content of the discussion. We do not need in these minutes that says Andrea said that it sounded like a great thing to put purple polka dot carpet on the floor in the sanctuary. And Mary said, I will leave this church if that's what's put on the floor. Um, so don't put that kind of detail in the minutes. It's not helpful. You lose track of what actually happened. If you need to have notes about things like that, take them separately. You might want to take those notes, and AI can be really helpful if you're meeting on Zoom. It might track all of those discussion items and who said what when and the different perspectives shared. But your goal in the minutes is to make it very clear that this is what happened. Don't list out who spoke on something. Some clerks I've seen like to put, we had the session discussed putting carpet in the sanctuary. Kara and Laverne and William spoke about that. It doesn't say what it was, what they said, but they put their name. Don't put their names there. Just put a note there that says Carol moved that the carpet in the sanctuary be burgundy, that kind of thing. That's what we want to do. Don't include details in the minutes that distract from the story of the congregation being told through the actions taken. You want to make sure that your minutes stay focused in that way. Um, because at some point, you're going to need to stand up and read those minutes, maybe. It might be something like this. Following last month's flannel graph presentation on the need to update technology, the board voted in favor. Uh, Now, what are the other things that need to go in session minutes? Oh, yeah, Kara.
So regarding the names of people who speak in the session meeting.
Hmm.
One of our regular processes is after we go through new business and continuing business is we go through the different committees, and the elders who are heading the committees will make a brief report if their committee has done anything. And I generally reference who that head of committee is who is making that brief report. Is that the way we should do it, or should I just say Christian Ed made a report?
No, I think it's absolutely helpful to have that delineated in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. If you look at if I hate to say this quite like this, but I will tell you to do this anyway. If you look at the Presbytery minutes, that it is very much spelled out in that way that this person made the report of this committee. So it very much is, it's helpful to have reminders so that at least in the short term, you might be able to look back in a year or two and say, oh, this person was on that committee. I can maybe ask them for some greater clarity about what was going on there. So, in 50 years' time, that's less helpful. But in 5 years, that's probably potentially useful. So the things you want to make sure that you have in your session minutes. And this is based on the minutes checklist. Whether the meeting is a special or regular meeting, you need the name of the church, the place, time, and date of the meeting. When we say place, that might be on Zoom if you're a Zoom session meeting group. The name of the moderator of the meeting. That is really important because the Book of Order says that you can't have a quorum if you don't have your moderator present. And so if somebody later on says, well, we didn't actually have this meeting because we didn't have the proper moderator, we need to be able to track that in the minutes. Each meeting must be opened and closed with prayer. You need to identify who is present, the people who are the elders who are present and excused, and anybody else who is there. If it's one of those, if it's a session meeting where there's 20 guests, you don't need to list out every single one. You might say a number of guests were present from the congregation to discuss blah blank. So, um, but you want first and last names on those. You need to affirm that a quorum was present. It's often helpful to say a quorum consisting of at least five elders, or at least half of the elders or whatever your quorum is, go ahead and say what it is and that it was present. Um, Note that you approve the agenda and the minutes of a previous meeting. I will say the best way the slide here says any amendments may be listed. I will say that the best way to deal with corrections to minutes is to actually correct them so that the version that goes in your final book is not, you don't have to look at the next meeting to tell whether what was changed in there. So just change them and then you don't file them away permanently until they've been approved and you make those changes in the body of the minutes before you file them away. That's that is the best practice. Sometimes you might want to list it out, but more often than not, just fix it in the version of the minutes when they're approved. Um, there should be a clerk's report. That's mostly because there's usually business that you need to report as the clerk, and we'll talk some more about that in a few minutes. Um, you want to include the reports of the pastor, other staff, and the treasurer and committee chairs. Summarize those in a few words. If some sessions really like to include the entire report as an attachment. That's great if you do it. Be consistent. Look at what your predecessor did. If you want to change it, talk with your session about making that change. Talk or at least talk with your pastor and say, I'd like to summarize, I'd like to go from the 17-page finance report to and including that in our permanent minutes to just including a brief summary that says, here's our, we're going to take the first page of that um, and summarize it kind of thing. So, do what works best for your setting. Um, the minutes need to reflect all motions and amendments and whether they passed or failed. One thing to be very careful about is to make sure that you carefully record all actions taken to hire, compensate, evaluate, discipline, or terminate non-ordained staff. Someone might, you just want to make sure that you have clear statements in your minutes about what you've done on all those things so that if there is any question, you can say, on this date, we hired this person. On this date, their service concluded. And whether they are resigning, when we say terminate, that's not just fire them. That's if you accept their resignation, make sure that you track their last day in your minutes. That will help you later on. One thing to note that is new in our session minutes requirements, that's not even on these slides, is that we now require your session minutes to have some mention of your insurance coverage for your church. So we want to make sure that in the body of the minutes, it says the church has property and liability insurance, and please list the carrier or the agent or some identifying details about that coverage. If some of your churches might have been caught up in some recent litigation when there were changes to laws related um, to sexual abuse, and I was working with a council at the time who was scrambling to figure out where their insurance was. We knew that we had the insurance, but we couldn't figure out who the carrier was because it was 30, 40, 50 years before, and there was no clear record of who it was, and nobody thought to save those records. So put it in the minutes because we know that that will be around. It doesn't have to be anything more than a sentence. Mary Lynn and then Kara.
Um, so it goes in the minutes only when it's pertinent to what's been happening.
No, it should be in the minutes every year.
Oh, I
Just,
see. So
yeah.
like a separate sheet
Or
for the whole.
it could be in the finance, whatever committee is responsible for it.
Hmm.
You just put it like if your policy renews on June 1st in the June minutes, make sure that that committee's report says the church's insurance policy was renewed for the term of June 1,
Okay.
2026 through May 31, 2027, with coverage from Guide 1 or whatever the numbers and everything look like.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Kara?
Like for my business, I have a certificate of insurance that I have to. It would it be proper to add that to the notebook?
It could be, that's a good way to do it.
Okay.
Um, for the presbytery, we actually put the full declarations pages in our permanent books.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit about records and archives here. The clerk, because the clerk is ultimately responsible for preserving the records of the church. You need to make sure you know what to keep and what to throw away. Um, if you hear nothing else from me tonight, please hear this. Keep the minutes and all important papers in a secure place at the church. Keep as little as possible with you at home. Make sure that anything permanent is at the church. The stories of churches where the clerk had the minutes at home and then something happened to that clerk are real and all too common. So keep those records in a secure place at the church. Make sure they're not in a place that somebody on clean out day that you're out of town for says, "Oh, this book of minutes from 1998, we don't need those anymore, do we?" And everybody goes, "I don't think so." And they throw them away because those minutes are probably not going to be able to be recovered. So once you kind of get to the point that you're not actively using minutes, figure out what works best for you. Might be, I've seen churches make that decision kind of on a 3 year basis, a 5 year basis, maybe a 10-year basis. Place the older records in an archival facility. Columbia Seminary offers that for free right here. So it's not hard to get them if you need them. The Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia also offers that for free. It's a little harder to get them, but they will also take them. So those are two very important, so some of the most important things you'll hear tonight. Yeah, Kara.
Andy, I know a year or so ago I was looking at the Columbia website because we have quite a few shelves of notebooks of minutes that I would love to. And I wasn't able to find anything. The only thing I found was something along the lines of Columbia no longer offers this service. So if you could please find out the contact information for doing that, that would be amazing.
You should be able to just email archives at ctsnet.edu.
Archives at Charlie Tango Sierra Net at edu or
Dot
dot
edu.
dot edu.
I'll put
Okay,
it in the chat as well.
thank you.
Callie, you're muted. There
I'm
you go.
sorry. Would you please repeat the lady's question or comment because I could not hear it clearly?
Sure.
She
So
was soft spoken, in other words.
she was asking about archives at Columbia
Mhm.
Seminary
Mhm.
and whether she was concerned that there was at some point in time they were not accepting new records. That is not currently the case as far as I am aware. And so I was just sharing with her information about how to get access to that. I also
Thank,
just found the link and put it in the chat to the archives.
thank
Um,
you.
it, there are we are actively working with them to make sure that records end up where they need to be. And once they're at the seminary, the nice thing about it is if there are people who need access to them, they don't have to come find you as clerk to get them. So it's an extra advantage.
Thank you.
Sure. People always talk to me about electronic records because they're convinced that they can take all of those notebooks and shrink them down. And they're not totally wrong, but I'm going to tell you it's not as easy as you think. So, um, it is my practice and my strong recommendation that you always make and keep a paper copy of all approved minutes of the session. Do you need to keep an approved copy of a paper copy of the minutes of the finance committee? Maybe, but you want to make sure that the session you have the paper copy of those. If you're going to keep an electronic copy, use the what's called the PDF/A format. That marks it as archival and discourages people from changing it. And may and takes a few of the things that it can take. PDFs are great and they can do lots of different things, but this makes it so that it's a much more standardized format and it is harder to change and it's harder to lose track of. Don't keep your files in some weird random format. Like, don't put them in Microsoft Publisher or Apple Pages. Um, put them in PDF. If you're going to keep electronic copies, make sure you keep multiples of them. Don't just put them in the sessions Google Drive, um, I, or even worse in Dropbox, where it's everybody's individual Dropbox. I was a in my previous work, I was working with a commission on ministry in the in previous presbytery, and one of the chairs of COM had access to write things into the Dropbox and delete things from the Dropbox. And one day we opened up Dropbox and everything was gone because he decided that he needed to clean out all of the COM files because he had run out of space in his Dropbox. And so thankfully we had a backup of those. We could very easily restore them and we caught it very quickly. But if you're going to have something like your permanent records, make sure that you have multiple copies of them. Control the access to them. Make it so that only you, as the clerk, have permission to write to those areas and add to them, and so that somebody doesn't go in and unintentionally start taking minutes for a committee meeting on top of last month's session minutes. All of these things have happened. If you're looking at going more electronic, please reach out to me. If you know me a little bit, I'm a pretty techie kind of guy, but and so I've got some best practices and can help you think through what you might need to do. Um, so alongside all of this, the clerk supports the life of the church in a lot of different ways. And these things are not in the book of order so much as they are just in what happens. And so some of you might not do this. I mean, some of our churches have a staff person who takes all the minutes and the clerk signs them. Uh, and that's a great way to do it if you've got the resources for it. In some other churches, the clerk does a whole lot more than take minutes. Uh, and so these are some of the things you might just be aware of that might come your way. You might get asked to send out the meeting materials. You're almost very likely to get asked to record and compile the minutes. You're probably going to be asked to put together that clerk's report. The moderator might talk to you about preparing the agenda or expect you just to do it. Um, and you might need to make sure that the session stays on top of those routine tasks that easily get lost and nobody remembers, oh yeah, we need at some point this year we need to do this. So um, and there's a couple of things that I've come up with that will help you with this. First of all, it's the clerk's report. The clerk's report is a little bit like this post-it board here. It's got a bunch of different notes of a lot of different things. But this is a monthly review of the items that just need to go in the permanent records. Um, if they might get reported elsewhere, it's okay to still put them in the clerk's report. Um, so just because you want to make sure that they don't get lost. That's the most important thing you can offer is to help things not get lost. The clerk's report might also refer to something twice. First, it might show up first as being approved and later as being done. So let me walk you through what some of the kinds of things that show up in the clerk's report, and you'll see more about this. So often the clerk's report will mention baptisms, and you'll want to approve the baptism on the front end and then say that it was done on the back end. The same goes for the Lord's Supper. You approve it on the front end, and then record that it happened on the back end. I strongly recommend that you look at approving the Lord's Supper once a year. So you might do that, work with your pastor on getting that on the calendar at the beginning of the year so that everything is really clear. You also can put in a nice little line in there that says that authorizing the pastor to administer the Lord's Supper whenever it is pastorally sensitive and theologically appropriate, as long as it's then reported. So that then gives the pastor permission to uh, do communion with the homebound or in the hospital. They don't need to take special permission to do that, and there's less tracking involved. So here's some of the language that might show up in the reporting back. Communion was served on date at the blank time worship service, and later that day to homebound persons by the people who served it. Or the pastor served communion to blank on this date with the names of the persons present. The clerk's report is also a great place to put weddings to be approved, new members to be received, transfer requests to be approved, removal of members from the roll, just tracking births and deaths, and the ordination and installation of ruling elders and deacons. There other things show up in the clerk's report as well, but these are really helpful just to make sure you don't lose these because they need to go in the permanent record as you tell the story of the church. Any questions about the clerk's report?
Hey, Andy. We do have all of these activities, births, deaths, baptisms, new members, all the things, recorded on their own pages that are tabbed in the notebook that is created every year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they are not all regularly mentioned in the clerk's report at each stated meeting. Should they be in both places?
I would put a mention of the fact that they're recorded elsewhere in the clerk's report.
Okay.
So they don't have to be doubly reported and recorded,
Mm-hmm.
but just say in the clerk's report, the session received a list of births and deaths that are reflected in the appendix to the minutes or something like that.
Thank you.
That's a better practice for a larger church. So, in a smaller church, you might track those month by month, but in a church of 3, 4, 500 plus members, it's probably better to put them all in that separate section. Anybody else have a question on the clerk's report? Any more comments or as well? Yeah, Laverne.
Uh, so if when a member passes, you should have that in the report or in a separate report.
It can go wherever works best for you. So it needs to be in the minutes somewhere. And if you're concerned about it getting lost, make sure it's in your report as the clerk.
Okay.
But if the evangelism committee or the new member or the membership committee tracks that, you don't need to do that. But just make sure it doesn't get lost because at some point in time, you'd be surprised the number of times it's really helpful to someone to say, here, what was the date of birth or death of this person? I mean, you know, more than if you look back 200 years, most birth records are actually in church records, not in civic records. Yeah, Karen.
Right. I keep it, it's just not in the minutes. It's separate.
I would keep it somewhere in the permanent record. So if you just put it if you put it in your
Okay.
minutes book at the end of the year, that's okay too.
Okay.
But yeah, I'd keep it with the permanent record.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just double checking to make sure that we are using the same words for the same thing. Um, when you say clerk's report, um, my brain first goes to every stated session meeting. There's a place for a clerk's report, which is usually correspondence, letters of transfer, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, are you also including in this concept of the clerk's report the yearly notebook that we put together that has all the business of the church for that year?
Most of that business is going to show up in the course of the session meeting somewhere. And if it doesn't show up elsewhere, the clerk's report is a great place to put it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? Yeah. So one other th any more on the clerk's report? I mentioned one other thing.
Oh, yeah,
Oh, yeah, go
I
ahead.
just
Yeah.
had a quick question. You had mentioned that there is um a minutes checklist. Is there also a clerk's report checklist?
Not a formal one, but you can make one out of this.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think there might even be a document in one of the things in the folder. I just know I think I pulled this from that document. But yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm. Callie?
We keep saying the clerk's report. Are we indicating a separate document, a separate sheet that's called the clerk's report? Or we are talking about making sure this information is in the body of the minutes? Because sometimes if I had several actions to take place, I put them all on a separate sheet of paper and gave it to the session members. So it wasn't in the minutes, in the body of the actual minutes, but on a separate sheet of paper.
As long as
Um,
it's in the permanent record, the version
okay,
that's approved by the session, as long as those items show up there,
okay,
and that's what matters.
okay, okay. Thank you.
Sure. William, I'm going to make a note and make sure if there is a separate handout on this clerk's report. If there isn't, I will make one because I think that would be a really helpful thing for y'all.
Mhm.
And
I
I'll add it to that folder.
okay. I'm very sorry to ask this because it seems like everyone else probably knows the answer to this already, but where is this folder?
I haven't told you, I haven't given it to you yet.
Oh,
I will
okay.
email it to you when it's all over.
I thought I missed it. Okay.
No, you
Good,
didn't.
good.
You're okay.
You are not the only one wondering that.
I think I maybe blurred past that. I said it in my head, but not out of my mouth. So, um, yeah. So let me tell you a little bit about the annual checklist because I think this is another thing. This I know I have a document on for you. Um, or again, if I don't, I will make sure you get one. This is a list or outline of tasks to be done at different periodic intervals. So it could be monthly or quarterly, every January. Don't put something on here as once a year. Assign it to a month because then you'll make sure that it happens. Customize this for the needs of your church and build it off of the session minutes review form that I'll make sure you have a copy of. So I'm going to just kind of show you the kind of what I'm talking about here. So every month you want to record, you want to make sure you have this list of the things that you record every month, the things that you have to do as the clerk. Um, you might even split this list into every month before the meeting and every month after the meeting. So before the meeting, you send out the materials and prepare the reports. After the meeting, you finish the minutes and file last month's minutes, that kind of stuff. Um, then you might have, so then to give you a sense, like January, start on the statistical report. Make sure that the budget gets approved. Elect the commissioners to presbytery meetings. Approve the celebration of the sacrament of the Lord's Supper. Call the congregational meeting. Then in February, you want to make sure you approve the statistical report. In May, you might prepare and sign the confirmation certificates. Approve in August, you approve church school teachers and curriculum for the new year and submit the necrology report. In September, you make sure that the stewardship committee is bringing their information. October, make sure you call the congregational meeting for electing officers. Um, you want to approve the budget. You see things on here twice because some churches do it at different times. If there's an annual meeting of the Board of Deacons, go to that. Make sure you get the changes in the pastor's terms of call ready. So those are the kinds of things that show up on your annual checklist. Any questions about that? And again, I'll make sure you get that document in something so that maybe it's easy for you to make your own. One other thing to keep in mind that is often the clerk's responsibility to maintain is the manual of operations. Manual of operations is required by the Book of Order for all the councils of the church. It is to specify the form and guide the work of mission in that council. Um, the goal here is the requirement was added about 15 years ago when we moved away from we moved the Book of Order being about 3/4 of an inch thick instead of being about an inch and a half thick because we wanted to make it so that each church could be more flexible and the structure could be based on the needs of a particular setting. Manual of Operations is a collection of policies, procedures, and best practices for your session and congregation. It's what you have figured out works for you. The best description I have come up with for this for sessions, I feel a little bit differently about presbyteries, but for a session, think of the manual of operations as your loose leaf binder of policies, procedures, practices that you're always ready to update. So when you pass that new funeral policy, make sure it goes in your manual of operations so that it's really clear that when you step down as clerk and move away because uh, you won the lottery and got to go wherever you want, somebody can pick it up and know what's going on. In the folder I've mentioned that you will get a link to, I promise, there are some resources for preparing a manual of operations as well. And I'm happy to assist you with that in any way. The big thing I would suggest as well, in short, is to start out by creating the table of contents and then figure out, and I think there's a sample table of contents in the folder. And then you can figure out, okay, what are the policies we already have that belong with this? And what are the things we need to add to it? So, because you've probably done 70% of this work. It's just that other 30% that you may need to finish or you just need to catch up on. Any questions on this manual of operations? So, as we think about how we keep the story as clerks, we do help to keep the story of the broader church. And most of this work is done by the work that we do to report our actions to others. So here are the main things that we ask you to report. First of all, we ask you to report who your clerk of session is. So, because it's really helpful for me to know who our clerks are. So I can send you an email with the latest information, remind you, statistics deadline is next week. Don't forget to come to clerk training tonight, that kind of thing. Uh, so when the clerk of session changes, please make sure that we know about it. There's an online forum on the website. It literally creates a task on my to-do list to update your information. Um, it's your responsibility to report commissioners to presbytery meetings. That doesn't mean I need you to tell me who they are. I don't, but to make sure that they have the information they need so that they can attend presbytery meetings. That's how we do it in Greater Atlanta. In some other presbyteries, we actually do require the clerk to say, here are the commissioners to the presbytery meetings. One thing I will mention here is to encourage you all to think about whether you might have a continuing commissioner, especially if you have more than one commissioner for your congregation. See if somebody might be willing and able to go to all the presbytery meetings this year, because it will probably be a more fulfilling experience if they go to more than one meeting. If you just go to one meeting, you don't get a full picture of what the presbytery does, and you end up just walking away scratching your head. But once you've seen two or three or four meetings, you're like, oh, I'm connecting the dots. Now I understand what COM is. People and this CPM. We have a new committee now, COPR. Is that the people who are ready standing by to resuscitate those who are getting sick or bored or falling asleep at the meetings? No, that's the committee on participation and representation, because we want to make sure that other people are engaged and involved. So think about ways that your church might send um, someone to more than one presbytery meeting, because they might actually get more out of it and be happier about attending rather than saying, I just have to go. Um, it is your responsibility as clerk to report your pastor's terms of call to the presbytery for your installed pastors. You're doing, if you've got a temporary pastor, a contract call pastor, you're already doing that because you're sending in all that information every year for renewal as well. Each congregation is required to submit their minutes for annual review as well. And so that's another important part of the reporting process, and the session annual statistical report, which I suspect some of you are working on diligently right now, or I know at least one of you has finished it. So we'll talk for a second about those, especially about those two items. So first of all, the annual review of minutes. The Book of Order technically calls this general administrative review. The goal of this is to ensure that the proceedings have been correctly recorded, that they were conducted in accordance with the Constitution of the PCUSA, that the actions taken were prudent and equitable, and that the work has been faithful to the mission of the whole church. So, and how do we do this in Greater Atlanta? We come together about once a year at the beginning, sometime usually in the second quarter, kind of March through June, and clerks review one another's minutes. You bring this minutes review form. I didn't put all of it on here because I'm not going to because we actually walked through a lot of this already. Because this is making sure that you have been doing the work we've been describing. This is your peer review process to make sure that we have the information we need, and that somebody 25, 50, 250 years from now can look back and say, this church did these things in this way at this time. Any questions on the annual review of minutes? I am working on the dates for that, and some of you may be hearing from me about hosting that. One thing I will note this year is that I'm going to try to do this in our new regional structure. So we'll have locations in each region and encourage you to attend, encourage but not require you to attend your region. Along with that, partly because of the geography involved, we're probably going to have most of these on a weekday evening rather than Saturdays this year. So um, hopefully that's a little bit easier on people for travel. And we're going to try this and see how it goes. And if y'all complain, if it doesn't work, we'll look at other options for next year. Uh, any questions on minutes review? All right. Well, we have one final thing to talk about before last call for questions, and that is the session annual statistical report. There is a whole other presentation on this you can see on the Clerk of Session YouTube page. Um, this is where you make sure that the broader church knows your number of members, your church budget, the composition of your membership. It helps us to understand more about who we are as God's people in the Presbytery of Greater Atlanta and in the Presbyterian Church USA. You should have received access information for this in December. The system is open as of January 2nd. The submission deadline this year is February, make sure I get it correct, 16th. There is, I will tell you this, there is a limited window after February 16th where you can finish the statistics yourself. Um, there is a date at which they shut down the national system for clerks of session. And so there's a short window that after that deadline date. I'm not going to tell you what it is because then you would make it your new deadline. So just know that you need to have your statistics in by February 16th, if at all possible. If you can't do it yourself, if you try to go do it and it says you can't do it, reach out to me. I've got about an extra 2 weeks that I'm able to add or update statistics. Or if you figure out, oops, I put a period in I put a decimal point in my financial numbers, and you went from a $200,000 budget to a $20 million budget because it just wipes out the period. It doesn't remove the stuff after it. And you don't discover that until later. You can reach out to me and I can correct that. I usually look at our bottom line numbers. And once the budget of all of our churches hits like $70 million, I know that somebody's done something wrong. So, and I can go back and find where that happened. It happens almost every year because decimal point, do not enter it, enter whole numbers only, no decimal points. Uh, any questions on statistical reporting? Yeah, Lee.
Let me unmute. This statistical report has to be presented to the session, correct?
Yes.
And if my session meeting is after that date in February, that could be a problem. Should we do a called meeting or something before the deadline just so people could see it and approve? They have to approve it, or they just need to see it?
They need to approve it. So here's what I recommend for most folks. Go ahead and put it in. Have them approve it after the fact. If there are any changes, just send them to me and I'll make the changes for you. One of you on this call tonight, I'm not going to say who it is, did exactly that, and it was totally fine. It took me 2 minutes to fix it. It's very easy to do. So don't, like, because 99% of the time, it's all going to be rubber stamped. So if you find that mistake, don't worry about it. Just send it to me. The other little thing little tip is I'll tell you, don't click there's a like final submission button to say, I have finished my statistics. Don't worry about clicking that. The only thing that does is it locks you out from making changes. It doesn't actually, you don't lose anything if you don't click that button. So if you discover you need to make a change later, it's okay. It's a whole lot easier if you haven't clicked that button. I can still change things even if you have. Don't worry about it. But yeah, and I can tell when you have submitted statistics. So um, I don't have to wait until the end of the reporting period. So you might get a nudge from me or your ministry connector or whomever if you haven't done it by close to the deadline. But yeah, let me know. But if you have questions, if somebody's trying to figure out what does this weird financial category mean, happy to try to answer that for you. And I'll tell you a little side note. I was a part when that report was updated about 7 or 8 years ago, and I was a part of the committee that helped rewrite that. Um, so I know a little bit about how statistics are done, and you can blame me for a few of the things that are on there. So blame me as much as you want. Any other questions on this? Just yeah, Frida,
So not particularly on the statistical report,
that's
but
fine.
just forms in general. I think I saw this in an email that you had sent previously, but for those forms that are online documents or just forms that we can access online, like for example, the necrology report, where
Mhm.
where are those located?
All of those forms are always linked from the clerk's corner on the Presbytery website. If you can't, I would, if you're a clerk, you might want to make sure that you have it bookmarked. But I just put a link to it in the chat. You can also go to the Presbytery website, and it's under care. So EP Corner, Clerk's Corner, under care there. And pretty much everything we talk about on this, and the folder is not on there, mostly because it's kind of a collection of resources I've gotten over the years, and I'm not always sure who I got them from, so I don't necessarily, I think I've got permission to share them, but I would like to give more credit for them because they're not necessarily mine, but I don't know that I have done the perfect job of that. So I do share it only to people who come to these gatherings. But if you're watching the recording of this and you need a link to it, drop me an email. I'll make sure you get it. Other questions? Statistics, forms, links. I'll just say too, if you can't find a form, if you're struggling to fill out one, if you need a blank form to if you're a worksheet kind of person, you want to take notes on it, just drop me an email. I'm the keeper of the forms. I'm the maker of most of the forms in the presbytery. So happy to get you, if you need a contract call renewal form or you need a pastoral terms of call form, whatever you need, drop me an email. We'll get it for you. If not, I am really grateful for your presence tonight, but even more grateful for your work. I clerk of session it's often a thankless job, and it's something that people do because they love the church and because they love God and because they want to tell stories at their heart and make sure that we don't forget who we are in the future. So, let me invite you to join me in prayer as we close. God, we thank you for the story you share with us, that you invite us to be in as we walk alongside you in the church. Help us as clerks to be keepers of your story, to carry it with us and to share it with others so that we might be a balm for our weary world in your church and beyond. Through Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen.
Amen.